Anti-heroes are a pretty popular character archetype, and for a very good reason. There are characters who are against the main characters but have their own motivations, goals, and morals that can make their actions understandable and maybe even valid given their circumstances. And when done correctly, usually end up being one of the most compelling characters in the story they're in. Anti-heroes aren't easy to write, as while they have understandable goals and motivations, most have pretty drastic and immoral methods with how they go about achieving those goals. And I think one of the best examples of anti-hero that has come out in recent times is Oliver, specifically the incarnation from the Thomas and Friends fan film, Tobias and the Arcane Merchant. Now for anyone outside of the Thomas fandom, you might be thinking, what? You think a character from that children's show about trains is a good example of an anti-hero? Yes, and let me explain why. But before we get into this, I just want to say that this video will have heavy spoilers for Tobias and the Arcane Merchant, and also for its prequel, Tobias and the Half Pariah. So if you haven't seen either yet, go watch them now. They are peak Thomas fan content. Also, last time I checked, 99.9% of people who clicked on my videos haven't subscribed, so if you like my stuff, please subscribe and like this video. Support means a lot to me. So to start off in Half Pariah, Oliver is introduced sometime after Toby and Henrietta arrive on Sodor when he pulls up to the same station Toby is at and asks if he is Tobias. After hearing about Toby's strength while eavesdropping near Tidmouth Sheds, he meets up with Montague, the main antagonist of this film, and throughout the film continues to act as an informant for Montague. He doesn't really do a whole lot in this film, but he does make his presence known, and the way he acts in this film, it heavily implies that he has his own goals separate from Montague's. The way he talked to Toby when he first meets him, implying that he knows more about Toby than Toby knows about himself, when he criticizes Montague for standing on the sidelines while others are trying to find Toby for him, when he just leaves while the battle between the Sudrian engines and Montague's army is going down, and this shot here in the post-credits. He doesn't do a whole lot in this film, but we have enough here to show us that Oliver has his own motivations and goals separate from Montague, but he's not really an anti-hero here. Now, in Arcane Merchant, it's some months after the events of Half Pariah, and Oliver reappears a while after a scene where Toby stops a runaway freight train orchestrated by one of Oliver's allies, Seward. He says his intention is to live on Sodor, but with the fact that he had Seward orchestrate a runaway and the way he speaks to Toby throughout the first half of the film, he clearly still has an ulterior motive. But in one of the next scenes, we get a glimpse of Oliver's true nature. In this scene where James and his mob ambushes Toby and Oliver, Oliver is hiding behind Toby for protection. Despite the fact that he was Montague's right-hand man and informant, Oliver is still physically an ordinary tank engine and doesn't really have the kind of strength to take on a mob of engines like Toby does with his hybrid body. And it's this scene here and other parts in the film where we see the more vulnerable, weak side of Oliver and where he goes from villain to anti-hero. We see Oliver's true nature more in the second act of the film, after Oliver performs a Warshot reset on Toby, which results in the original host of the hybrid engine and Oliver's older brother, Tobias, taking back control. After giving Tobias a crash course of what happened when Tobias was turned into a hybrid, Tobias asks why Oliver freed him. And it's this scene where we get the motivation for what Oliver has been doing.
I want to be a hybrid too.
Yes, Oliver is doing this because he wants to be a hybrid, to be strong, to be bigger than what he already is. Tobias laughs in his face about this, but when Oliver tells Tobias that he needs him, Tobias gets up in Oliver's face and glares at him, scaring Oliver. We can see where the desire to be strong comes from given this interaction, but also brings us Oliver's methods of achieving his goals. Oliver has always been using others to accomplish his goals. In the beginning of Arcane Merchant, Oliver tells Montague that he needs him, the same way that he needs Tobias. There is probably a part of him that wanted to help Montague, as Oliver could empathize with Montague that he knew what it was like to be unwanted and considered a failure. But at the end of the day, he was still using Montague for his own goals, and left the battle in half Pariah, likely because he didn't have any use for Montague anymore. But to go back to the scene where Oliver was scolded by Tobias, there's a couple of scenes in particular that really stand out to show what Oliver's relationship with Tobias is really like. In a flashback scene, when Oliver was still a tram engine, he was prone to breaking down a lot. Tobias scolds and belittles Oliver for this, instilling this inferiority complex in Oliver. There is also the fact that Tobias's nickname for Oliver is Little Ollie. Now, maybe I'm looking too deep into this, but to Tobias, he doesn't just see Oliver as his little brother, but smaller than him, and not an equal. Little Ollie isn't exactly an affectionate nickname for Oliver, as much as it is an affirmation that Oliver is smaller than Tobias, weaker than Tobias. Another scene that stands out to show this dynamic is when Tobias and Oliver fail to find the workman's coach, and enraged, Tobias lashes out at Oliver and pushes him multiple times. Up to this point, we've never seen Oliver being physically abused by Tobias, and Oliver is genuinely afraid, nearly crying because of the abuse. Like we went over before, Oliver, by himself, isn't really that strong. And because of his inferiority complex, he's driven by a need for strength, to become a hybrid, like he was promised years ago before they used Tobias to create the first hybrid. So much to the point that he finds solace in the fact that James and his allies are afraid of him. Power can be a selfish motivation for a character, but Oliver is doing what he does out of a misguided desire to be more than what he already is and like taking over the world or something. Because of this inferiority complex, backstory, and abusive dynamic with Tobias, we can sympathize with Oliver and on some level even root for him. This doesn't really justify Oliver's immoral actions, but it makes them understandable. And it's these factors that turned Oliver from a villain to an anti-hero. And despite what he's done, there's still a few scenes showing that Oliver still has a few screws left in tightly. He's horrified when Tobias nonchalantly says that he killed a guard, and also horrified during the death of Thomas. Oliver may have been deceptive, but he never went as far as to kill someone, and the thought of his older brother doing it terrifies him. After Thomas's death, Oliver tries to convince Tobias that nobody will be stronger than him and they don't need to stay on Sodor, but Tobias, being drunk on power and fed up with Oliver trying to talk some sense into him, shoves Oliver again. Despite everything he's done, Oliver still has parts of that innocent tram engine that wanted to be better than what he is. Which leads us to the climax of Arcane Merchants. The last scenes of Arcane Merchants are some of the best stuff ever put to video by the Thomas community. After following him to the hybrid making machine, Oliver calls Tobias predictable and recalls the designer saying they would have taken a weak, pathetic engine, turned them into a hybrid, and seeing what Tobias is like with the hybrid engine, says they were as good as their word. Tobias, the master of crashing out, tries to attack Oliver at the same speed he used to attack Thomas, but an electrical fence protects Oliver. He pours out his feelings about wanting to be seen, to be worthy of Tobias, but down the line realized that maybe Tobias was never as strong as he thought he was. Tobias threatens Oliver again, saying this is his life, which then leads to the most satisfying and arguably best line of dialogue in Arcane Merchants.
Your life is over, but mine is just beginning!
Ugh, the voice acting is so good. And right after throwing Tobias's own words back at him, Oliver leaves Tobias and enters the machine to obtain what he was promised 18 years ago. To become bigger and stronger than what he already was and ever was. Somebody, as Oliver would say. And despite Oliver being an antagonist, it's a pretty triumphant moment. Oliver may not be heroic, but his journey throughout this movie makes this such a satisfying conclusion to his arc. It's kinda conflicting considering Oliver is kind of the one that started this whole thing, but it is very satisfying to see Oliver stand up to Tobias. But we're not done yet. In the post-credits, we see the aftermath of what happened at Crom's Field, the machine destroyed, with the moon shining over Oliver. It flashes back to when Oliver was still a tram engine, once again crashing, Tobias leaving him there, and Montague appearing, calling Tobias a monster and encouraging Oliver to leave him in the dust, never look back, and to erase him from his life. With Oliver in the present as a hybrid, he opens his eyes, revealing black scleras and red irises, which still gives me chills even when I've been watching this film constantly. Anti-heroes are complex characters in the stories they're in, and Oliver, with how well written he is no exception. We see his connection to Montague in Half Pariah, and that connection to Montague was explored more in Arcane Merchant, leading us to his connection with Toby, bringing Tobias back, showing us how awful Tobias is and what their relationship is like, and why Oliver is doing what he's doing. Adam Guzik could have just made Oliver the next villain to replace Montague, but he made him so much more with how brilliantly he handled Oliver's character. And I think it was a nice move for him to make Oliver be the way he is than any other character, since in the Railway series and TV series, Oliver was saved from scrap, so he was seen as useless and weak compared to modern diesel engines. And because of the praise he got for his journey, he got a superiority complex, but here, Oliver has been put down and abused so much that he has an inferiority complex instead. So making Oliver this more tragic and misguided anti-hero is a pretty great take on a more antagonistic version of the character. And like every good anti-hero, Oliver's actions are never justified but understood, and because of his arc, he's such a complex and layered character. There's a lot of shades of gray in Arcane Merchant overall, actually. Maybe I'll cover Montague in another video if this video gets enough traction. I mean, it's definitely one thing that could keep me occupied while I wait for Tobias in the Birch Cathedral. Like, Tynes, no pressure, but I'm still in pain from that ending. But yeah, after watching this movie multiple times, it really means so much to me, to the point it might actually be in my top favorite films ever. And a fan project doesn't normally do that for me, but I think that shows how much blood, sweat, and tears Tynes put into this film. But I think I'm gonna save all the good I have to say about this film for a potential review. Overall, I really do think Oliver is a great example of how to do an anti-hero. And Tynes, thank you for making this film, and take all the time you need with Tobias and the Birch Cathedral.